Welcome back to The Champion's Mind. I'm your host, Naira Fields, and this podcast is all about unlocking the mindset of high performers so you can show up powerfully in your own life. Today's episode is about thriving as a woman in high-performance, male-dominated spaces and how your past experiences, even your trauma or failures, can become your fuel. Whether you're an athlete, an entrepreneur, or a woman in leadership, this conversation is going to give you the tools to own your story, walk with confidence, and lead in any environment. So let's dive right into it, why it matters. Obviously, if you're a woman in these spaces, being the only one in a room, it can be quite fearful. It can be quite daunting to walk in a room, to see yourself being the only one, whether it's you're the only person of color, whether you're the only woman in the room. These spaces can be very intimidating for people who encounter the situation. So I'm talking to all the women who specifically in a day-to-day basis have to walk into a room and be the only one. Women often feel they have to become someone else to belong. But in reality, embracing your unique strength is your power. Honestly, I can relate with this a lot. It resonates to me because I grew up in a household where I was the only girl, which allowed me to walk in spaces where currently I'm in a sales role. And throughout my athletic journey, I've walked into spaces and been the only one, whether it's the only person of color or the only woman in the room. And a lot of the times when I walked into these spaces, it was really evident that I was the only one there. And it made me question myself. It made me feel like, okay, how do I bring value in a room where I'm literally the only person in there of my color, of my gender? And how can I show up in a way where I don't feel like I'm standing out like a Thor's thumb? So that's when I've kind of just encountered these certain situations in my life and how I've navigated them. But being able to walk into these rooms confidently is what we're really going to break down, and how to bring unique strengths and skills as a woman, as a person of color, as anybody who's just the only person in the room, to walk into these places with confidence. Let's talk about what it actually looked like to walk into these places and bring yourself fully into these rooms. We can talk first about the opposite. When you walk into these rooms, some people encounter just being able to walk into these rooms, not have full confidence, feeling like they have to adjust who they are to meet the standards of everybody in the room. That's not what it actually looks like. What it actually looks like is really walking into these rooms, understanding that, yes, you are the only person in this room, whether it be male, whether it be a person of color, but that because you're in that room, you have value. And let's start there. Having that belief that you have value, whether anybody looks like you or nobody looks like you, is where we start. Now, showing up fully in these rooms as yourself looks like understanding who you are. Yes, you can look across the table and see somebody completely different, and maybe you notice their strengths, but really putting the focus on what are my strengths, how do I bring value to this room, and who am I walking into these rooms? Having that at the forefront of what you're saying to yourself, or the focus, is really going to help you be really comfortable in your own skin and just being fully who you are in these moments. And now that we walk into these rooms where we feel like we're the only person or the only one of color, of the gender that we may subscribe to, but if we walk into these rooms and we're the only one, let's really focus on our strengths. And that looks like a lot of times for women specifically is communication, emotional intelligence, and empathy, which are super undervalued, but are very key soft skills that allow people to connect and build relationships. So with that being said, what I do when I walk into these rooms is, one, I just have a clear vision of who I am. This is Naira at her best. If I have that at the forefront of my mind, I know I can walk into these rooms and feel very confident without feeling like I have to, one, shrink myself or to be just like everybody else in the room. I know that who I am walking into this room is who I'm going to portray to everybody else. And that in that of itself, that's where the value lies. Now let's talk about communication. I'm typically not a person where I walk into a room, love to be the center of attention. And I know that about myself. But what I'm really good at doing is, when I'm in a small group or when I'm in a one-on-one situation, I know I can communicate effectively and build a deeper connection. And that's where my strength lies. So I typically try to find little key point scenarios in that room where I can just pull somebody aside and have like a very deep conversation. I know I thrive in those certain situations. So I actively look to create those situations in these types of rooms. Another thing is empathy. When I am having these one-on-one conversations, I can easily, one, deeply connect with these people through communication, but also if they're sharing something that's personal, that's vulnerable, I know I have the empathy to connect with them and resonate with them. And that also strengthens the relationship we can build in that moment. And the last thing is emotional intelligence. I know going into these situations, I'm super nervous. I know going into these situations that I might not be able to fully portray myself in the best way I can because I am nervous and I am the type of person who loves smaller groups. But in this specific situation, I know and having that awareness that I might just have to push myself outside my comfort zone. And I might just have to do maybe a little bit of prep work before I walk into these rooms, which can look like breath work and meditation. And that allows me to, one, center myself, ground myself, get to an emotional place where I feel like I'm comfortable. And the more I feel comfortable in these situations, I know the more I can show my personality, the more I can open up, and the more people can see me for who I am. I really want to encourage everybody who's listening. You don't have to shrink to fit into a mold. You bring value because of who you are. Be who you are when you walk into these rooms and know that you have value. So let's talk about trauma or your past failures as a way to use this as fuel to walk into these rooms confidently. Your greatest failure or trauma can become your greatest growth tool, but only if you take time to reflect, learn, and apply. I'll share a personal story of mine where growing up with six brothers, it wasn't easy at all. I feel like I just have a unique story in the sense that most girls or most women haven't grown up in this household where they're literally the only girl in the household other than their mother. And growing up with a lot of brothers, it really built this tough skin of me. They would constantly say I'm ugly. They would constantly tease me. They would constantly challenge me to, one, toughen up and be more strong. And I always felt like I had to prove myself to my brothers in order to just hang with the crew. And oftentimes it looked like me just trying to do everything they could do, but better. I remember specifically like me and my brother were behind the library and they had like this pond where it had these rocks. And every time these rocks were placed in the pond, they were spaced out like farther and farther apart from each other. So we're just playing like a game of leapfrog. And he was like jumping from like rock to rock. And I was behind him trying to prove to him that I can also like hang with them and do it better. So he would jump the first rock, I would follow second, and vice versa. That's how it would kind of just go. So we got to the last rock, and the last rock was the farthest. He jumped first. Obviously, he made it. And then I was like, I can make it too. He made it. So I jumped and I missed it by like just an inch. And it ended up really hurting myself. I like fell under. There was like a metal rod that was sticking out under the pond of that rock. And my leg ended up hitting it. So when I like got up after I fell into the pond and hit myself, I noticed that I had this huge gap in my shin and I had to like run to the hospital and get it stitched up and stuff like that. So that was one thing that I kind of learned early on, that yes, I do want to like show people that I could hang with them and I want to show my brothers that I can be just like them. But also what I realized in that moment, that I don't have to be just like them. I'm not just like them. And that being different and being a woman who values her femininity, who values also her emotional side and her logical side, is just as good. And I didn't need to prove to him that I can be just like him. So just offering practical tools to help you, one, gain more awareness about how you can use your failure and trauma as a way to fuel you and have this confidence where when you do walk into these rooms, you feel super confident in who you are and super grounding. One, before that moment, I did a lot of therapy and life coaching. So initially, I didn't have the awareness that my childhood was deeply impacting all of my decisions that I made, and that every decision after that, it was just an outcome of me being hurt. And the decisions that I made were out of pain and not out of love. So understanding that and having that awareness helped me to understand that moving forward, it wasn't about being like somebody or being like somebody I admired or being like somebody that I truly felt like they resembled me, but I just admired them. I really understood that you can admire somebody, but also be yourself. And that's where your true value lies. So that's what I did first, was do a lot of like life coaching if you can, or do a lot of therapy to get that awareness. Another thing I did was journaling. So I'm a big advocate for journaling. I really just wrote down how I was feeling, what were the things that were making me feel sad, angry, upset. And that allowed me to gain this awareness where I could connect things and put two and two together. The reason why I came to the realization that I didn't have to be like my brothers, that I can be me and still thrive, was because I would write it down and then I would go back and I would read everything that I wrote down. And I started to see patterns and connections. And once I came to a place where I could put the full picture together, I realized that I was just doing things because I felt like I needed to prove myself, when really I just needed to be who I was, and that was enough. So going back, I really just want to challenge everybody. What's one story you've been avoiding that might actually hold your power? For me, it was the story that I felt like I needed to prove myself. I needed to show my brothers that I can be just as good, if not better. And that was a story that was holding me back. It wasn't until I came up to this realization that I knew that I didn't have to be like anybody else, but I just had to be myself. And once I let go of that story, I was in a new and better place. So I'm going on to the next topic. You don't have to be a man to succeed. And it's not just a man. You don't have to be pretty. You don't have to be insert anything you want into the blank area. Specifically, we're talking about men because we're talking about women in male dominated spaces, but you can substitute the man for anything. And that's what really want to focus on this part of the podcast. You don't need to be tougher, louder, or more masculine to thrive in male dominated spaces. So I'll go a little bit into how I really redefined my own success for what it looked like for me. Growing up in a sports background, success is really defined for you. How many points you score, specifically for basketball, how many championships you win, specifically for a team sport, and overall, how did you perform? And it's really very black and white. You scored 20 points, you're the best player on the team. You won a game, you didn't win a game, you won a championship, you didn't win a championship. And that's very black and white. And what I started to realize is that I needed to create my own story of what success looks like for me. Because there was times where I didn't win. And whenever I felt like I didn't win, I felt like a failure. And there was times where I didn't score 20 points, but I felt like I did a great job on defense and I was super active and I did a great job in leading my team. But because we didn't win the game, I felt like all of that was a failure. So what I started to do is I started to redefine success for myself. Specifically for my game, in basketball specifically, I was a great jump shooter. And for people who don't know what a jump shooter is, basically a jump shooter is somebody who can shoot really well beyond or inside of the arc. There's a 3-point arc that people shoot from, and that's a really high point shot. But what my value and what my strengths were was shooting inside of that. I wasn't a great 3-point shooter, but I knew I can pull up and shoot off the dribble and I could shoot inside that 3-point arc. And I realized that there was like 2 or 3 people on my team who were really great 3-point shooters. And I felt like I needed to be a 3-point shooter. And I knew I wasn't. And then I got to this place where I was just like, why am I trying to be what they're great at when I know my jump shot is the best part of my game? So once I really started to redefine what the success looked like for myself, I started to take more inventory of, okay, I might not be a great 3-point shooter, but where do I thrive? And I started to put all my focus into shooting great jump shots. So in the game, regardless if we won or regardless if we lost, if I shot really great jump shots, or if I gave energy, or if I was playing great defense, or if I was being a great leader, regardless if we won or lost, I started to hold myself accountable to really showing up in these spaces. And if I did that consistently, that was a win for me within the win or the loss that happened in the game. So when I did start redefining my own success and I was really looking on really creating great jump shots, okay, if I had open three, I would shoot it, but I really was looking to focus on my strength and to do that consistently. And when I started to do it, I actually became a better scorer overall. Yes, I can hit the three. It wasn't my greatest strength, but I started to get to the rack more, which is driving and get it to the basket or giving a layup. Or I started shooting more jump shots. And actually, it increased my scoring percentage. And I went from averaging like 10 points a game to 20 points a game. And that's when I really started to thrive. And although it was something or a skill that was different than most of the people on my team, it gave me an edge and it helped me be successful in my own role. So I want to share a couple of core lessons that I learned from growing up in a household of 6 boys and being the only girl. The first one is that don't prove people wrong. Like, people will see you for who you are and just let them. When I started to realize that I didn't need to be just like my brothers, I didn't need to prove to them that I could hang, that I'm just as tough, that I'm as strong. When I started to realize that, I really started to embrace my unique value. And that was just me being more introverted. That was me being more feminine when I wanted to, but also being tough when it played the part for that. Me being more introspective, me being more deep, me being more relational. My brothers were the opposite. They were the bravado. They never showed vulnerability. They didn't show emotions. And I started to notice that whenever I emulated that, it just felt so weird to me that it didn't feel like I was being myself. And the more I started to feel that, the more I started to see that I was moving farther and farther away of who I was. And that in pursuit of trying to prove my brothers wrong, that I was just becoming a different person that I didn't recognize. So when I came to that realization, I was like, I'm never going to try to prove someone wrong, because in the pursuit of trying to prove somebody wrong or that you're just as good as, you start to lose yourself. And I never wanted to get to that place. So that was a very valuable lesson that I learned just growing up with six brothers and feeling like I had to be just like them. I would definitely give credit to my brothers for like building my competitive edge, my emotional resilience, and my drive, because they pulled out a side of me that I needed to be and do in order to survive in that household. I feel like if I wasn't that, I wasn't going to be able to get through it or make it through just being very like emotionally resilient. Like they would push me to these places where I felt like I couldn't come back from. But every time I did, or every time I rose to the occasion, it just made me stronger emotionally. And then the competitiveness. We actually, in my household, had these challenges and we had these competitive things where whenever we were playing a sport, we played every sport: track, rugby, basketball, football, we played it all. We all had this bet where it was just like, who can bring home the most trophy? Who can score the most touchdowns? Who can win the most games? And like that was like a thing in our household where we competed like for everything. It could have been just like us walking, like who can get to this pole, to that pole the fastest, and we would run. So like it was everything we did in our household was competitive. And that instilled a lot of like competitiveness in me that helped me be the 3-time Olympian that I am and have so much success in my career. So there was a lot of good things that happened in that household that if I didn't grow up in that type of environment, I don't think I would be as successful as I am today. So now when I walk into these places, specifically sales and specifically my past career as an athlete, when I walk into these spaces where I feel like I'm the only Black woman or I feel like I'm the only woman, I literally feel so much confidence because I went through all of that with my six brothers. It allowed me to understand that although I was different and although that I was the only one in a certain space or environment, that bringing who I was, whether it be the emotional side of me sometimes, or the deep side of me sometimes, or the logical side of me sometimes, those things will make me who I am. And that's where my confidence lies, not in being like everybody else, but in standing out. So now I can walk into these rooms with like this edge or feel like very confident because I know I bring something unique and different, and that's going to stand out in a good way. So how this relates to you or how you can apply it to your own life is answer this question. What in your upbringing gave you an edge that you might be overlooking? Really think about that and let me know what it is in the DMs, or you can give me a shout out and just let me know how that upbringing actually shaped you for who you are today. So just ending this off, I really just want to leave you guys with this. You don't have to fit in to rise up. You get to own your story, your strength, and your voice. And I want to leave you with something to reflect on. Reflect on a part of your story that you downplayed and ask how it could actually be your superpower. DM me on Instagram or leave a review if this spoke to you. I'd love to hear your story. And as always, your mindset is your power. Use it. Peace.